I'm very grateful to everyone who's contributed to this debate. If I may, I'll address the proposed amendments and then come to the specific points that have been raised. If I may turn to first to the new clauses 1 and 2 as tabled by my honourable friend the member for Stone. These new clauses would, if adopted, mean that the provisions in the bill would apply notwithstanding any domestic or international law. The House will be aware that on the 17th of September the Government set out that Parliament would be asked to support the use of so-called notwithstanding provisions in clauses 44, 45 and 47 of the UK Internal Market Bill and any similar subsequent provisions in a finance bill, but only in circumstances where the fundamental purposes of the Northern Ireland Protocol would be undermined. So only in those circumstances would Parliament be asked to support the use of so-called notwithstanding provisions as described. These clauses... I'd be delighted to.
Briefly. Of course, we don't really know just exactly how the Northern Ireland Protocol is going to be interpreted, nor do we actually know its full content. And the Duchess of Lancaster, Chancellor of the Duchess of Lancaster, is declining to appear in front of my committee to explain it.
Well, what we do know is that the agreement was reached by the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster acting for the government on a duly, legitimately, democratically elected basis in the exercise of our national sovereignty. That should, I think, be enough for the honourable gentleman. Mr Deputy Speaker, these clauses were previously introduced as reasonable steps to create a safety net so that the government would always be able to discharge its commitments to the people of Northern Ireland in the event that a negotiated outcome could not be reached in the Joint Committee. Following intensive and constructive work over the past weeks by the UK and the EU, the Government has now reached an agreement in principle on all issues in relation to the Protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. This is an agreement that discharges the Government's commitment to the people of Northern Ireland to ensure that there are no tariffs on goods remaining within the UK customs territory. As part of the agreement, the Government committed to removing the notwithstanding provisions in the UK Internal Market Bill and not to introduce any similar provisions in this bill. As was noted by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster in his statement to the House last week, in view of the agreement, these provisions are no longer required. On this basis, I therefore hope the House can agree that new clauses 1 and 2 are unnecessary. Turning to the proposed new clause 3 and amendments 1 and 2 tabled by the opposition, these would, if adopted, require the Treasury to publish guidance setting out its proposed approach to any reliefs, repayments and remissions for which the bill allows provision to be made. The provisions contained within the bill ensure that the Government has the flexibility it needs to establish the framework for such reliefs, repayments and remissions. Details of any policies along these lines will be announced in due course, and HMRC will publish detailed guidance providing certainty to traders and businesses as is their normal procedure. For this reason, putting such additional provisions in the bill is unnecessary, and therefore I would urge the House to resist these amendments. New Clause 3 would, if adopted, require the publication of various reports setting out the timeframes in which the customs duty charges contained in Clauses 1 and 2 would be implemented, as well as the factors taken into account when using these powers. The provisions contained within Clauses 1 and 2 allow the Government to establish customs charging provisions to support the practical application of Article 5.1 and 5.3 of the Protocol and to deal with the movement of goods from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. This is important legislation which will ensure that the Government is able to implement the Northern Ireland Protocol as required in UK law ahead of the end of the transition period. The regulations that set out the detail of the charging regimes will be laid after this bill receives royal assent. This bill thus provides the framework, and the detail will be provided alongside the relevant regulations. When bringing forward regulations, the Government will also provide explanatory material in the usual way. If I may turn to some of the questions raised by the members and right honourable members who have spoken in the debate. The honourable gentleman opposite encouraged the Government to get a move on. Well, as you will know, the Government has been proceeding extremely rapidly and energetically in this area ever since the issues first arose. And he asked the question about guidance. And of course, he is right that guidance in the normal course of these things will follow the publication of the bill, but he also ought to be aware, of course, that the guidance that will be published follows the Northern Irish Protocol, the command paper, and that in relation to other matters, which is what I was referring to, the House has seen customs guidance on the 7th of August, Trader Support Service launched on the 28th of September, guidance on VAT and excise on 26th of October, and a whole host of other information designed to support traders and others involved in these changes. He asks the question, what new systems are being put in place, and the Right Honourable Gentleman Member of Wokingham also raised the question. Let me respond to that. He will be aware, the Right Honourable Gentleman from Wokingham, that the agreement for at-risk and not at-risk goods requires there to be a genuine and substantial use for the goods to be classified as at risk. We expect there to be up to 11 million, HMRC I should say, expect there to be up to 11 million declarations in relation to trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the Customs Declaration Service, which has been put in place, has a minimal viable product up and running as we speak. The Honourable Lady opposite referred to hokey-cokey clauses, but of course the clauses have never been included and were themselves a response to a perfectly plain concern which every member of this House should feel, which was that as the matter stood, even a bag of salad would be considered an at-risk good, a consequence of the previous understanding that was patently absurd and which has been removed by this change. The Honourable Member for Warring and Leamington talks about a last-minute approach, but I would remind him that when this point was made, or this attempted point was made by the Shadow Chief Secretary, I asked her if she could recall a single occasion on which the EU had ever failed to negotiate except at the very last minute of a negotiation, and she was unable to point to such a case, and that is, I think, the principal reason why we are in the position that we are in. And with those remarks, I would urge the House to resist these amendments.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We've had an interesting debate, and as far as I'm concerned, the government had originally proposed